Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. If you are into spirituality, mindset, and how this affects your emotional, mental, physical, and financial well being, I've got Joanna Rajendran coming out of Florida come to us talk about. She is actually an author who wrote the book My Guru Wears Heels, and she spent under master teacher Tao Porchon Lynch, and she's sharing lessons that she's learned. And I'm really happy to have her on and add value to the audience. So, Joanna, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. I'm excited to be here with you and your audience.
Yeah, I love your positivity and your energy. And introduce yourself, and we'll dive into the work that you're doing.
Sure. That's no small feat, right? Just sum up your entire life. It's so funny how we often do that. And in different situations, the way that we introduce ourselves also shows up differently. But in this case, my name is Joanna, as you mentioned, and I did spend the time from when I was 17 for over 2 decades with the world's oldest yoga teacher. And with her, we traveled states and countries, inspiring people through breath, yoga, meditation, and beyond. And since my time with her, I've taken a lot of those messages out of the studio, off the mat, and share them with people where they need it and when they need it. So often that's in small communities, big corporations, athletic teams. And it's just reminding people of the magic that already exists, that we can use our breath, our minds, our peace to enhance every aspect of our lives.
Mm. Yeah, and we can jumpstart the conversation is just talk about this idea of mental and emotional health that just I think COVID really put the spotlight, Simone Biles in the Olympics, and this talk about the mind body connection and why we're so disconnected. A lot of Eastern cultures, they have this strong connection, but here we're disconnected and it's actually causing a lot of strife and pain. And how can we come home to that?
Oh, absolutely. And you're spot on. It was the perfect storm because COVID really highlighted what was already happening more gradually, especially with the advent of technology and social media. Just think about it when I'm assuming we're somewhere near the same age, Chris, even though it's a big presumption. But when we were growing up, we didn't have this access to technology where children today through their smartphones can have at their fingertips anything from porn to beheadings on the most negative scale and on the seemingly innocuous scale just by scrolling, getting stuck in a scroll hole. If we were growing up and we weren't invited to something, you wouldn't have all the photo evidence of everything you think that you were missing. And what that brings up, this feeling of being hyper connected yet isolated, overly stimulated, and lonely. It's really showing up as an increase in depression, anxiety, and just overall, even if you don't have the extreme of feeling actually depressed or anxious, I'm sure you have noticed an increase in bits of those feelings. More distraction, less peace, more worry, less focus.
Yeah. And it's exacerbated through just our culture and just go nonstop. And the so which brings me to the question is when clients come to you, what is their number one problem? Like, why do they come to you? What are they looking to solve or alleviate?
Usually it's one of two things, Chris. It's either they have an incredible life, but they're wondering why they can't feel it. Why can't they enjoy it? Why can't they know on paper that they have total gratitude? Maybe they've achieved all of their dreams. They're the CEO of the company they built. It's super successful. They have children that are healthy. They have a marriage that's lasted a long time. Why can't they feel the peace that they think they should? So a lot of times it's that should, that disconnect with what they thought would come as a result, a reward of their success, and they're not feeling it physically, spiritually, or emotionally. Or it's somebody who wants to create something, either manifest the dream job or the romance they seek or the wealth they feel is missing. So it's one of those two things primarily. I want to feel better than I do now. And the real secret, the spoiler alert, Chris, is ultimately it all boils down to that answer. It's always, whenever we have a desire, it's because the thought of achieving or having that thing feels like it would feel good. So ultimately, that's what we as humans are seeking, that feeling that feels good.
Hmm. Yeah. And drilling down into that feeling, with the how did studying with Tony Robbins and studying yoga really help you to tap into this innate power that a lot of people have already started to awaken, but a lot of people this is their first time listening and they're like this mind body connection. Talk about that.
I'm glad you asked because especially since your audience is financially focused, this is a key component for many people who have a spiritual, esoteric, creative pursuit. We are conditioned to think of the notion of that starving artist thing. Or if you care about spiritual or Eastern practices, maybe you should be sitting monk like in full lotus all the time in a robe meditating. And if not, are you doing something wrong? So there are these subtle messages that we may receive that spirituality and wealth are mutually exclusive. So having these different mentors, someone like Tao, who never really cared about money, floated through her world with a philosophy of it will all work out. And not really, she had many challenges. She lived through wars and famines. She had seen it all. She was in the salt marches with Gandhi when she was just a girl. So it wasn't this Pollyanna belief. It was just this inner knowing that she always thought it would all work out. And one day she and I were driving to a workshop together, and she said, I want you to make a lot of money. And it was one of the only pieces of advice she gave me that came as a surprise. And I mentioned that to her. I said, I'm surprised to hear you say that. She said, I was never really good at the money part. And if I was, I could have spread this message farther earlier. And I realized in that moment, and that's why I appreciated someone like Tony Robbins, who does the work that lights his soul on fire and is unapologetic in receiving the rewards for it. And if you think about money as energy, as a resource, who do you want to have that resource and that energy? You want the people who want to go out into the world and do great things. So if someone is listening and they find that disconnect with, I want to pursue my passion, even if that's not going to be my path to wealth, I challenge you to say, why are you adding that limiting belief to it? Whatever it is that is your passion, you can do that in a way that will also bring you the words in terms of financial currency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll talk about money because ultimately the best quote that I've read about money is an idea. Money is abundant because it's like you said, it's a currency and it's spiritual energy. And what's interesting is in here in the West, we equate income and net worth and money with status or the ability to consume things. And talk about there's the spiritual side of money and the dichotomy and how thinking of money as a success measure or a status measure or a measure of your worth, how these are unhealthy paradigms to be thinking about.
Perhaps if we make a small shift in your question with the wording, it'll be easier to connect the dots. Instead of it being a measure of success, what if we used it as a measure of our happiness? And a way to do that, if you realize that money can provide a lot of freedom in your life, then you realize, wow. And it starts by asking yourself, if time and money were no issue, what would I be doing? What is it that sets my soul on fire? What is my unique gift? Because when you are pursuing your passion, your purpose, it has a whole different energy than if you're just doing a job. And the difference is it feels like a get to as opposed to a have to. So I'll give you an example in my actual life because this happened today and happens many days. There are many days I live right on the beach. And so there are many days where I'll begin my day walking the beach, and I'll either do some walking breath work, some walking meditation, or maybe I'll just even listen to a podcast. And other days I might begin by playing pickleball with some of my friends. So I often am the butt of the jokes in my family, and they'll say things like, must be nice not to work. So often when you trade the thing that's expected, the thing that might be normalized societally, for that thing that is your passion, it might not be easy to understand for those in your immediate world, even those that you might be super close to, because it might look different than the status quo. So for me, what money feels, and being someone who's also been made fun of in my family for talking so much my whole life, now as a keynote speaker, they all joke, wow, she figured out a way to get paid for talking. But even though I say it as a joke, it's really not, because whatever it is that you love to do, that you do organically, authentically, and often, you can make that either part or all of your profession. And when you do that, the way that you measure success is different. It's how excited you wake up and how satisfied you go to bed.
Mhm.
And I'm sure I read a bit about your story, Chris. I'm sure that retiring from a profession that is on the very expected linear path in medicine, I'm sure that you had to make some soul searching decisions at different crossroads.
Oh
Did
yeah.
it change the way that you measured your success?
That's why I love talking with, because, and that's why I studied Tony Robbins, and I love talking around spirituality because it's really ingrained in my family and culture. How much you make, how much you earn, your net worth is a measure of your self-worth and what you achieve. And so I'm always trying to reconcile these two things. So I love talking about just finances and spirituality and how they both can blend together. But
Did it shift for you at some point? Because I say in our lives, sometimes we have the tell me people, the people you could share your ideas with, the people who believe in you, in what you're saying. And then you have the show me people. And it might not have anything to do with you. They just might think traditionally and they need to see the result before they could buy into what your path is. So in your life, did you discern who you shared your ideas with when you were pivoting? Or were there some in your lives, especially if it's culturally ingrained about your net worth, that you showed them the result could still be just as good, if not better, and then they bought in?
yeah, during the shift and pivot, what I realized was that it was really hard to cut ties with some of the older traditional ways of thinking. And basically, I spent about a year or two just really what they call ghosting, basically
Mm-hmm.
ghosted, just really hunkered down and focused and shut out all negative influences and just to, and then later on 8 9 years later, then when you showed them the result, they're like, oh, now they go from haters to supporters. So that was, it was really a big epiphany. But it was one of the hardest things, is you just have to cut off. There's people with so many different viewpoints and ideas, and you have to really focus on who you have to have selective focus, is what I realized. So
Absolutely. In my book, the new one that's coming out in a couple of weeks, it's called Best Life Ever. It's based on my favorite course that I teach. And in that course, we cover little habits of happiness, of joy, of success. And I make them very simple, because for years I would have people say, I would love to meditate, but I'm not good at it. Or I wish I could do yoga, but it's too slow for me, or I can't clear my mind. I would hear all these blocks to people getting the results that they said they seek. So in this course, even though there are bits of spirituality, of breath work, of things woven in, it's not really about that. It's about small action steps that we can do that really change the experience of our lives. And some of that are just what you're talking about. In one, and the name of this is silly, but it was inspired by me talking to my niece when she was a preteen. I call it the bubble of awesome.
mm,
So if you picture around all of us that we have this energetic sphere. I told her the first time she had challenges with friend stuff when she was growing up, your biggest job in life is going to be to protect this bubble of awesome.
Mm.
Inside this bubble is everything that makes you uniquely you. It's your kindness, your intelligence, your wit, it's all of it. It's inside that bubble. There'll be people in your life when you're with them, they feel like they inflate your bubble. And those people are always welcome in. There'll be people who you feel like poke little holes in it and they're deflating to your bubble. It doesn't mean you have to love them any less, but not everyone deserves access. In practical terms, that bubble of awesome is really us protecting our energy. And this will show up in work situations, in family situations, in social dynamics. It will show up. So you can either protect your energy when you go into these interactions, or you can limit their access to you. But it starts to help you identify, and different people can change in different seasons of life. So when you were talking about your ghosting period, you intuitively knew who you had to block so that you could successfully pivot from one path to another.
Mm. Yeah. I like really fascinating. I love that idea of blocking access and who gets your energy. A follow-up question I have for you is because what I've realized by talking to you and then studying some of the truly greats, Tony Robbins, people that are on a whole different wavelength, a whole new level. And there's a lot of everyday individuals, they're striving, they're putting in their time, they're striving, and sometimes they have a lot to show for it and sometimes they don't. But then when you migrate to a different spiritual plane, when you shift your focus from just this transactional or trying to get to serving and giving, talk about that different. I see like people that are operating on a different wavelength in a plane that it seems to just naturally come to you. So why is that? And talk about how people can cultivate that migration.
I love the idea of frequency. Our thoughts have a vibration, our words have a vibration. There was this amazing study done where they studied ice crystals and how they formed with different sounds. One was classical music that was gentle, and one was like a harsh rock music, and the crystallization was different. So the things we say have an impact. We are also made mostly of water, so we can extrapolate what the crystallization of the ice means for us. So the words we say all the time have an impact. The thoughts we think all the time have an impact. It begins to create the experience of our lives. So if what we're feeling is scarcity, lack, stress, and you use the word striving, if it feels hard and arduous, we have that confirmation bias naturally occurring in our brain where we seek evidence to confirm what we already think. So if you think that struggle equals success, don't be surprised if you keep getting more examples of struggle in your life. If you think hard work is going to get me the results I want, then we can't be surprised if everything feels like a challenge along our path. If instead we realize that by doing what it takes, and it doesn't mean it's easy, doing what it takes to identify what it is that we dream of, and then put ourselves in the absolute ideal condition to receive it. And that comes in practical terms and in emotional terms, knowing we're worthy of receiving that.
Mm.
It can feel like when you think of a friend you hadn't spoken to in a long time and suddenly they call and it seems like coincidence. Or I dreamed of this meeting going so well and I closed my eyes and I visualized it and it went exactly how I dreamed it to be. And it seems like a surprise. But our brains don't decipher between real or imagined. So when we start to use it to focus on the things we want more of, the frequency we're emitting is going to make us recognize the small and medium and huge miracles that seem to appear coincidentally along the path.
Mhm. Mm.
And Tony Robbins, he always says the quality of your life is related to the quality of the questions you ask.
Mhm.
So in my first book, I actually talk about I had a dream that seemed crazy and impossible at the time. And I wanted to connect my teacher, Tao, and Tony. I thought they would hit it off. I thought that she had no idea. She doesn't know anything about, now she's passed away, but she didn't know anything about celebrity culture, pop culture, or famous people. So she was always surprised when people wanted to meet her, and she was always grateful and humbled. But similarly, she was like that with the Dalai Lama, with Deepak Chopra, and she was like that with every individual human who crossed her path. So it was very even.
Mm.
Tony Robbins, I was at one of his events and he was highlighting this incredible person who I think was running a marathon in her 80s. And I just had this light bulb moment and I thought, he needs to meet Tao. She was in her late 90s by then, still teaching yoga, leading retreats around the world, ballroom dancing competitively, and doing it all in high heels. That's why I called that My Guru Wears Heels. And long story short, because this took a lot of coincidences or seemingly coincidences, and miracles. But I had this dream of connecting the two, and it went from vision and idea to us being in his backyard and having a conversation in probably less than 2 months. And I must say, at the time we did have that conversation, I just had a baby with a C-section, and we were meeting in another state, and it was about 2 weeks after that. This conversation, when we had it, to see somebody who had been doing this work for so long, like Tony had, and to see someone who had been a thought leader and world changer, like Tao had, when the two of them met, it was like seeing a spiritual first date, like a like connection of soulmates on an energy level. And similarly with Tony's wife, Sage. Sage was so gracious and generous, and she was sitting on the grass right in front of Tao because she was so soft spoken. She wanted to hear her more clearly. And I remember always thinking Tao's eyes sparkled when she spoke with people. And I was watching the exchange of Tony's eyes sparkling, Tao's eyes sparkling, the two of them leaning in closer, the quality of the questions he asked. There was just no ego, all beauty in this conversation. And it was more like, what have you seen and experienced that like lights your soul on fire? And the things that they got out of that meeting were so beautiful. And it was because they thought, I am so present. I am so here. I am with somebody else who lives this life and does this work and is a natural healer, impact maker. And I'm going to get every bit of deliciousness that I can get out of it.
Wow. So how can people find you? Because I know you do speaking, you do coaching, you also do whole retreats. And how can people connect with you and learn more about you?
Instagram is a great way. That's a good use for social media to find the things you want more of. So if someone is seeking habits of happiness, joy, success, I teach a virtual course that's 12 weeks, and they can find me through Instagram, joanna.rajendran, or on my website, which is my name, joannarajendran.com. And in 3 weeks, on March 25th, that's when the new book, is that a Tuesday, March 25th? Nope. Yes. Okay. Trust me with anything in life, Chris, except for numbers. Numbers always get me jammed up. But Tuesday, March 25th is when the new book, Best Life Ever, comes out. So that will be everywhere when it does.
Yeah. A really soulful conversation. And I really love the vibe and keep up the great work. And I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. As did I. I appreciate you having me.